Finally! Star Wars! And this has given me a new hope in the entire
year's worth of videos.
Watching movies.
You can get out now. That was a pun.
No.
Puns are quite allowed here, I'm afraid.
You know we just watched a movie made wholly on puns, basically.
Yes, we are finally talking about the one that started it all. Although apparently since we weren't actually alive when it came out, we have no right to like it, so what do we know?
I
disagree.
I'm not allowed that gatekeeping.
I disagree.
This is my favorite Star Wars movie.
Every time I watch Star Wars, I always find that this one and Empire Strikes Back always fight each other for the top spot. And after this watch and watching it before, I was like, geez, this is why... Like, took me back to being a kid again, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could sit and watch all my action figures on the screen, watch the Millennium Falcon, and gets excited about sounds and stuff. It's really cool.
Yeah, and there are certainly Star Wars movies that, in my opinion, have cooler moments and have scenes that, like, impact me more when I look on them, but I think Star Wars is just the most fun and most satisfying movie as a whole.
It's not a perfect movie.
No.
And when we were watching it, we kind of did call attention to some of the faults that we saw as we were watching it.
Oh yeah, there was like 50% nitpicking and then 50% like, oh, this is great.
But that's just it. It's just so enjoyable all throughout.
Even the nitpicky parts are fun to watch.
Yeah, like, it's not as bad as it was during some of the prequels when there's just a moment that left us groaning in almost actual pain because of how bad that certain scene was.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, even the parts that you're nitpicking in this, you're nitpicking out of love because it's not bad. It's just like, well, this is kind of dumb.
Well, I mean,
It's
is George Lucas trying to do... It's his version of Flash Gordon because he couldn't do Flash Gordon, and so he had to do something different.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I ever knew that.
Oh, really?
No.
Yeah, he wanted to make... Originally, this was going to be a Flash Gordon movie, but then that project just fell into the cracks.
Wow. They missed that boat
Yeah,
by a long shot.
Right.
I think when you consider it, also just kind of like from a story-wise perspective, like Joseph Campbell came out with that book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces, talking about just like the generic, most commonly used story tropes in fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you'll see in the story that he laid out as the hero of a thousand faces is the exact same story you would see in Aragon, Lord of the Rings, and a million other examples. But here in Star Wars, it's almost done to perfection. Every
Yes.
single thing is exactly where it would need to be in Joseph Campbell's story about the hero of a thousand faces. And the reason that story is used so often is not because of a lack of creativity, but because that story resonates with the people that watch it.
It's a timeless kind of like template for a story that any generation can get into.
Mm-hmm.
Like whether or not we're talking about, people that have the ability to manipulate the energy around them, or like they're holding laser swords, or if they're like samurai warriors or stuff like that,
If you think about what they were doing, what's so impressive about this movie to me is the actors didn't even take it seriously. They were just like, if you watch some of the behind the scenes footage of Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill, they're like, pew, 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 as they're walking through the scenes. It's like nobody had any idea that this was going to be as big as it was. Literally. Like,
yeah.
Nobody had any idea. It took the world completely by shock.
I mean, it took everyone by shock, including them. We all know the famous story of George Lucas going to the opening screenings the day of. He didn't want to go to the opening screenings because he was just figuring that it would just be a huge bomb and a flop. But then he goes around to the theaters and he's seeing a line going around the entire block. And he's like, oh shoot, someone else opened up a movie this weekend and they're completely destroying us. Because if all these people are here, they're not here for Star Wars. They're here for whatever other movie opened up this weekend. And so he goes and asks them what they're here to see, and they're all talking about Star Wars, and it just blew him away.
the sound design, the visual effects, like the way that they were able to do this movie. Do you think
on such a low budget?
On such a low budget. The fact they even got Alec Guinness to even sniff this movie is beyond me, because that dude was popular. Wasn't he a knight at this point?
He was a knight, and he had, I don't know if he had multiple Oscar wins, but he at least had one. And
he
so,
was a big deal. So
a big deal.
Like, the fact that they were able to score Alec Guinness to be in the movie, which was probably their pull, is that he was in the movie, or one of them. Peter Cushing was in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a bunch of people that were in this movie. And you were saying they like had a cast of like 100 people or something.
They had a very limited cast, especially their extras. You could see a lot of the same people going around in different parts of the movie, just in the background.
Which makes it so funny that Fox was like, "All right, we'll pay for this movie. We want the rights." And George Lucas is like, "Well, I want the rights to merchandising, the titles. I want everything to be in my name," and totally fleeced 20th Century Fox out of so much money. Literally.
In fact, I don't even think Fox cared. Like,
yeah, they were like, whatever,
I thought
dude.
this was going to be a flop. We just keep going back to that, but everyone thought this was going to be a bomb.
Well, it's one of the great Hollywood success stories. I mean, it was kind of like, I mean, everyone talks about how like Jaws kind of invented the summer blockbuster.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, it did because it made bucket loads of money. And then Star Wars came along, and it kind of the same thing. And it's another similar story to where it had a lot of production problems, huge amounts of ones that like are publicized, and we just talked about them. But like, there's another thing where, you know, if those production problems didn't happen, we wouldn't get the movie we have now. And who knows what would have happened? I mean, it could have easily been one of those old like B movies that people just make fun of, like
Sharknado,
or Plan 9 from Outer Space. Ed Wood, that's what I was thinking of. But yeah, it could have been one of those things, but no. Despite the fact that there were a lot of different things that went on behind the scenes where like they weren't taking things seriously, or maybe some of the effects weren't working, or their little production goofs, like a certain stormtrooper hitting his head on a door.
Ding.
The great thing is that, warts and all, it combined into something that, even today, holds up and is magnificent to watch.
It is true. I will say, though, as we get into these movies where it's New Hope and Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, George Lucas went back and did the special editions, and they released them as the Blu-rays, and I'm glad as anybody else that they're in HD. George Lucas, like we were talking about, added, through consecutive editions being released, he added different stuff to them. And I don't particularly mind lots of the things that he added.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't distract from the movie. There's the one thing that I will be forever infuriated about is that stupid whatever alien animal thing that walks in front of Obi-Wan and Luke in the land speeder. I'm always bothered by that. But aside from that, the rest of the special effects stuff is decent. Some of the CGI looks pretty bad. Like, that doesn't hold up.
A lot of the stuff that was added back in the 90s special edition doesn't quite hold up today. We were talking about the Mos Eisley scene, and you're like seeing some of the other speeders flow by, and they're obvious that was a computer model from the 90s, and you just... It's almost out of place. It's almost jarring.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, a lot of this stuff is just flavor in the background.
Yeah.
Like when you're seeing extra sand troopers walking around in the background, or when you're seeing some more of these robots and creatures and stuff, and that helps it feel a little bit more alive to me.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you get to stuff like the X-wing scene, and you're seeing the pilots actually moving around inside of their cockpits. Because in the originals, they just had the stationary heads in the models as they were going across, and they didn't move, and it felt lifeless.
Well, another thing I like about the special edition CGI is like in the final sequence over the Battle of Yavin, where you look at the original version, that theatrical version, where all the ships are flying around, you'll notice that there's just very static movement of the ships. They're just like basically flying in a straight line. But with the added effects and the different shots that were added in, it's cool because they actually have like dynamic movement. They'll like swoop in, some of them do little tricks. And it's not there for show. I mean, yes, it is for show, but like it adds to the intensity and the speed of the sequence, and I think it still holds up.
Yeah. Like if you watch the original today, it would still be just as good of a movie. But just some of these little effects add to it, just make it just a little bit more appetizing, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So.
Although I think one of the key reasons why this movie will never be bad and why it worked in the first place, the music.
You can't talk about Star Wars without talking about the music. There's a joke that half of the billions should go to John Williams when they're talking about Steven Spielberg, because
That's fair.
like
Well, George Lucas needs to do that too. Needs to pony up to John Williams too.
because we had to pause our conversation several times during the movie just so we could listen to some of the particular songs that were coming on.
We watched the movie right before recording, all three of us, and we would just like lay back on the couch and be like,
I can't really describe it. You have to be in the room listening to it, or listening. Like you have to be in the moment, watching the movie, listening to the music.
Like I have a friend who is a music theory major, and he wrote, I think, one of his thesis paper on Star Wars music, about how John Williams will craft individual songs for individual characters or moments, but he will mix those songs up and combine them when those characters come into contact with each other, or when those moments evolve into another moment later on.
mm-hmm.
And so that music is continuously evolving, but you can still hear the same basic and beautiful tunes that he originally came up with.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Luke theme from Binary Sunsets, or the Leia theme, or the Force theme. And those songs are timeless even today, that they're in every single Star Wars video game,
Mm-hmm.
and they're still used in the Star Wars movies, and yet we're still not tired of them.
Yeah, and I like that you brought that up too, like the thing that your friend did with his thesis, because that is something that John Williams hasn't stopped doing. In the prequels, I remember distinctly in like the sequence where they're all battling in the Colosseum and Geonosis, various themes for characters factor into the theme that's playing while they're all battling against the Geonosians and the droids. And then in The Last Jedi, in the sequence in the end when the Battle of Crate is going on, that terrific music sequence.
That scene there is really good.
I mean, the music piece in that is terrific.
Absolutely.
We can agree on the music.
Yeah.
And character pieces are interwoven into that too. There's Rose's theme.
There's Rey's theme.
Rey's theme, yeah.
There's the Millennium Falcon part. There's
The TIE Fighter attack.
Yeah, the Resistance theme when they're flying out of the base. I think all of that started with here. Like, if George Lucas hadn't picked John Williams to do it, there would be a definite element of this movie that would be just terrible. Like, I can't imagine anybody else doing it. I mean, I don't know very many composers offhand.
Not to throw shade, but like Hans Zimmer movies, and he does a lot of music, and a lot of it is partially his whole studio and not just him. But he does a lot of music, and you'll sometimes hear just similar themes or stuff that's carried over from one movie to another, even though they're unrelated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not throwing shade at him, because he knows where his strengths lie. And so we can say the same thing about John Williams. John Williams knows where his strengths lie in character pieces and in this kind of mixing and weaving the tunes together. So he knows what he's doing, and like you said, I can't see anyone else doing it quite the same as he would.
He nailed all the emotions that you could possibly nail with his music, and it's not the kind of thing where it feels manipulative either. It always matches perfectly what's going on.
Yeah.
And even when the actors on screen might be hamming it up a little bit, and their performances might not hold up as well as you might think, the music just makes up for that.
It carries them.
It's true.
The music carries this whole movie, to be honest. There's never a part when you're saying, oh, I wish the music was stronger, I wish the music was a little bit more muted so that we could hear what's going on. The music always mixes perfectly with the scene at hand.
Mm-hmm.
It's muted when there's sad moments, and it's triumphant when there's victorious moments.
Yes. And it's also kind of ironic how, despite the fact that this is probably the most iconic film soundtrack in history, this is also the Star Wars movie with the least amount of music in it.
There's so many blank spots when they're letting the emotion just carry through without any music to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's partially what makes the music so good, because once it kicks back in, you can feel it. You can really just get pumped up Like when we're talking about the trench run.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, yeah. He actually pointed out, because like the first two parts of the trench run, when the rebels are trying to actually destroy the Death Star, the first wave of fighters get destroyed. The second wave...
It came from behind.
It came from behind! But yeah, in both of those sequences, there's no music playing. It's just the tension of the sequence, the sound of the fighters, and the chatter going on between the pilots. But once Red Leader dies, immediately... Like you said, the editors knew exactly when to put that music in. And I think that was another strength of this movie. Like, the editing is just...
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
As much as the wipe cuts are kind of odd, and they get way overused in the prequels, like this one had just enough wipe cuts that weren't overused that it wasn't bad. Like if you look at Phantom Menace, and you look at Attack of the Clones, and you look at Revenge of the Sith, every freaking shot in that movie is whoop, 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 whoop. Like, it's like they're doing a dance with the wipe cuts.
I mean, there's still some jarring ones in New Hope. Like, when they're picking up C-3PO. They pick him up and the camera literally follows him up off the screen. I always chuckle at that scene because it's always noticeable, but... They do try to find a good balance here.
With the wipe cuts. Like you said, the editing is pretty good. When they storm the detention block, where are you going with this thing? They don't even skip a beat, but as you're watching the camera angles of all that going on, where it's like, ta 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 ta, and they have to do all the lasers around the room and everything exploding, and Chewie going, choo 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 choo, and blowing stuff up, and them shooting all the Imperial officers and everything. It zooms around the room, but not like to where you're dizzy.
And it's none of that mindless shaky cam crap either.
There are some movies where it's bad. There are some exceptions, but like the detention block, it's not shaky to where you're dizzy, to where like you're like, ugh, oh my gosh, stop. Like the whole part's like, they're getting blasted. Who's gonna blast who? Like, you know.
And no given point in this entire movie am I confused about what's going on.
That is true.
Every single moment of the movie, everything is telegraphed, everything is direct and happening right before your eyes. Like, some would say there's a lack of subtlety there, but I don't think this is a movie that needs a huge amount of subtlety.
It's a space fantasy.
It's an adventure film.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need incredibly subtle things in order for the movie to be effective. I mean, sure, it can make it better, but I mean, for a movie that was trying out something different, and they had literally had no idea what this movie was going to result in.
You can see it too. Some of the scenes you're just like, man, I hope this is good. Let's do it.
Right? Well, throw it at the wall, see what sticks.
And they threw it.
They threw everything. Just look at the cantina scene. They literally were like, let's go buy a bunch of monster masks and throw them in one room and see what happens. And thus you have the scum and villainy.
And every time that you're seeing any kind of technological piece, it's literally just a bunch of like random junk that they pulled together and painted.
Yeah, how much random stuff can we put into a movie?
Let's do it.
Yes.
The Sandcrawler was an RC toy with like wooden slats on it. Like, that's it.
Right.
But when you watch the shot, it doesn't look like it.
It looks like this epic large vehicle going through the sand.
Which is why Lucasfilm is the best, because they took crap and made it awesome. No, I'm serious. Like, you think they took random junk and made the musical things for the whatever the Cantina band. They're just random junk that they painted to look like musical notes or musical instruments.
That's one of the main comparisons that people make from the prequels to the originals, is that different philosophy about CGI. CGI is the garnish, it is not the meal.
That's true.
Well, everything in Phantom Menace looks shiny in comparison to all the dirty, like worn down stuff in A New Hope.
Absolutely.
That feels more tangible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, another example of stuff that could have been junk but turned into something great. I pointed out one of the blasters that like a stormtrooper was holding. It was pretty much like the size of someone's torso. It looks like copper pipe that was painted black. But it's the coolest thing ever.
It looks dope, man.
Even Han Solo's blaster, a World War II pistol prop
There's a Mauser
with two PVC pipes taped to it. and then painted black.
And now it's like this iconic blaster
Now
that's
it's
sold.
a legendary blaster.
That still gets sold in toy stores today.
Because it looks dope, man.
Yeah.
We could mention with that theme R2-D2.
Mm-hmm.
Because in this movie, he feels like a little robot, like or big robot, as the matter may be. He feels weighty. He feels like he's moving around, and he hits the ground hard. In the prequels, he flies around. People are like, he's going around with ease around and everything, and he has a tool for every possible situation that they could come up with. He feels like a little CGI thing off in the distance. He doesn't feel like he's there, a robot.
Yeah. Well, you can argue that like they did that so that the character doesn't feel stale and that they're not just being repetitive and putting on the movies. But you do make a point. Like it feels more tangible that way. And then also, we all pointed out that like the Gonk droid looks like
It's a garbage can.
It looks like two garbage cans taped together and then they painted.
With someone
With
like
feet.
with feet walking through in the middle of a garbage can.
It is so lo-fi.
Oh
It's great.
man, this movie on the watch through, I was like, what the heck? Look at all this. Look at all this stuff. Which points to the like. You could take it one way or like, wow, they didn't have any imagination. All they used was garbage cans and duct tape. But then the other way, you could think, man, they took a normal thing like a trash can and made it into one of the most iconic Star Wars droids ever. Everybody knows what a Gonk droid is. If you know what Star Wars is, you know what a Gonk droid is. They're the ammo boxes in Battlefront 2, by the way.
Yes.
I think you're pulling up so easy.
One of my favorite stories. Have you ever seen the concept art for the Millennium Falcon?
No.
It's a long cylinder, and they did like 12 different pictures of long cylinder-looking ships, and it looked like something out of Flash Gordon, like you mentioned earlier. It did not look like the Millennium Falcon. One day, George Lucas was looking at a half-eaten hamburger on his plate. He said, "I like that shape. Let's make a ship out of that." And that's where we got the Millennium Falcon from. Like
What a
before,
piece of junk.
all of the concepts were of a completely different looking ship, kind of like what the Corellian Corvette looks like now. So now, because of this turning junk into something awesome idea, we have one of the most iconic ship designs in history.
What's funny is, this is kind of a side note that I just remembered now. When they were making Phantom Menace, remember when they were doing the pod race? I remember watching a documentary with my dad. They found, that one pod racer where the guy's sitting in the circle thing? They were eating breakfast, and a guy he looked at a donut, turned it sideways, and went, "Hey, what if this was a pod racer?" And that's how they got that pod racer. So that's kind of funny that he just was like, a half-eaten hamburger. What if this was a spaceship?
We got the Millennium Falcon out of this.
I love the imagination. You would have had to have an imagination and been like, dude, let's be super committed to this and run with it and see what happens.
Yep.
And George Lucas made billions off of this franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Billions.
There's an argument to be made that because this movie was as successful as it was, and George Lucas was kind of like forced into making blockbusters from that point on, he might have lost a little bit of artistic potential there. I mean, before this, he made like THX 1138 and American Graffiti, which are much more experimental and vastly different from what Star Wars is.
That's
and
true,
of course, he was also inspired by Akira Kurosawa, specifically the Hidden Fortress, in making Star Wars. But nonetheless, this is one of the best movies ever.
The casting, I don't know if anybody else could have pulled them off. I'm not sure who the actors were at that point. Every movie that's been successful now that I can remember has taken relative no-names, like Star Wars. You think of the Marvel guys, the Avengers. They took Robert Downey Jr., someone whose career was in the trash, basically. I mean, I don't know what he was doing at the time where he was Iron Man, but Iron Man revitalized his career because nobody had any context of what he was. And I know he'd done some TV shows, but he had basically passed all that, and he was trying to get out of a hole that he was in because of some personal decisions.
I've got two examples of for and against that. Like Avatar: The Last Airbender, the movie, was absolutely atrocious.
Ugh.
I think there was one actor who had done a previous Western production,
Ugh.
Everyone else was a brand new, no-name character.
Okay.
And I think
So that wasn't a success.
Fair.
But on the opposite end of the spectrum, you had Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
9/10 of the actors for Lord of the Rings were either no-names or people they'd literally gotten off the street. And so these are relative no-names, and so that kind of goes with your point that sometimes that can be a gamble, but sometimes that gamble can really work off well.
My point is that they like hit a home run with the people that they picked. And they did the same thing when they did Force Awakens. Daisy Ridley, John Boyega. Oscar Isaac was mildly successful,
yeah.
but he was relatively a no-name. And I think that they tried to do the same thing that they did with New Hope, and they did it again with Force Awakens, which I really
Successfully,
appreciate.
yeah.
Which I really appreciate.
As long as you have a couple big names to actually tie the movie along, like Alec Guinness in New Hope
And Peter Cushing.
and Peter Cushing, or in Force Awakens, they had several big names as well,
Oh, that's true.
like Wendell and Christie. So
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
she's Phasma. That's
Plus
right.
they got like Max von Sydow, who was like a very famous European actor in like that little cameo he had. And then
Domhnall Gleeson. He's a relative no-name too, wasn't he?
no, he's been in, I mean, he was in like the
No,
Harry
he was
Potter
in
franchise.
Harry Potter. Never mind.
And he was
in
also
Harry
in some other pretty big movies too. Not like big movies,
and
but
you can kind of go back to the prequels with that same idea. Sure, they had Samuel Jackson, but they also had Ewan McGregor,
Liam Neeson.
Liam Neeson, who
He was kind of popular before that, wasn't he?
Well, he's giving examples of people who are like big names
Oh,
big
to
names
support the
to
no-names.
support the no-names. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Because like Sam Jackson, he had Pulp Fiction, and then like Liam Neeson, he had Schindler's List and stuff like that, which
Yeah.
were huge films for their careers.
I think this formula was kind of made popular by this movie. For better or worse, people get pigeonholed, at least in this movie. Because Harrison Ford really is the only one that clawed his way out of being
He's the-
pigeonholed as Han Solo.
Yeah, he's the only one who had like an actual like
Film
career of a star. You know what I mean?
Acting career, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Hamill is one of the best voice actors ever, and Carrie Fisher has gone on to do like a lot of script supervising and script doctoring for people.
She's a
That,
very-
And stand-up comedy too.
yes, there's that too.
Yeah. She's really funny, by the way. If you watch some of her other stuff,
I have.
she's really funny.
She's really good at roasting people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Especially herself.
Yeah.
Yeah, she is.
There's literally so much stuff we could talk about this movie, but is there anything like definitive points we want to touch on before closing up?
I think I'm good.
Cool. Well, I guess with that in mind then, I would go ahead and say that despite the fact that this movie has flaws, I will give it an A+. Because the things that matter are great. It's like when I watched the original Lion King a couple weeks ago in comparison for the remake. There were definitely things in there that weren't really all that subtle, and there were like little things you can nitpick here and there. But at the core, it works in a sublime way that is just, you can't deny its quality or its impact on you. And that's the same thing with A New Hope for me. Just like as an adult and as a kid, I loved and respected the things that mattered most about the movie.
I think sublime is a really good word to describe this movie. For 2 hours, I forgot completely about like work, school, bills I have to pay, stuff that I have to worry about all the time. And you're like transported to a galaxy far, far away with ships and lightsabers and tales of adventure, and it's just great. This is the movie that we all grew up on. I mean prequels were out when I was a kid, but this is like
All of us, yeah.
but this is like the movie that started it for me, I guess. And I mean it started for a lot of people, but I don't know. I have to be up there with like a near perfect score. I'd probably do a 9.8. The only like a 9.9. The
All right.
0.1 is that stupid animal that walks in front of the land speeder. I hate it so much.
So the original cut would be like a 10 then?
Yeah, the original cut would be like a 10. It only gets knocked down a 0.1 for that stupid camel thing. Yeah.
When I was a kid, I would watch the 3 Star Wars movies over and over and over again.
As would I.
Yeah.
My nieces and nephews would watch movies like Cars or Finding Nemo or stuff like that over and over and over again. I watched the 3 Star Wars movies. And of the 3, I watched 4 and 6 more than anything else. And of those 2, I watched 4. when it comes down to it, Star Wars as a movie has helped shape what I'm interested in, what I like, down to all of my media choices to this day. It could probably be traced back to my original love for Star Wars.
I'm the same.
Yeah, it's pretty
Yes,
influential in that way for me too.
I'm the same.
And so for me, like just going from that alone, even discounting all of the great quality that we've discussed and we've talked about in this movie, it would get an extremely high score. But honestly, I would have to give it a 9.8 because it does have its flaws. And it's not a perfect movie, and there are some things that you can laugh at. But for me, it goes beyond any other movie that I've ever seen in affecting who I am.
Well, there you have it, folks. It's been impacting people's hearts and minds since 1977. It's impacted ours, and it will continue to be that way. I'm just really curious to see, though, like, when all of us eventually have kids, what they'll think of this thing.
I don't know.
Well, they'll have the full 12 movies to watch. So
Yeah.
they can enjoy that.
We just better make dang sure we have them watch this first.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because they gotta appreciate what...
The classics, man.
We
Gotta respect the classics.
It's Hendrix!
It's Hamill.
It's
Hey,
Hamill
hey,
and
there you go.
Harrison and Fisher and... Oh, one last thing. Okay, so there's a video on the internet. You mentioned this. No, there's a video on the internet of when they didn't use James Earl Jones' voice as Darth Vader. And they had that one guy, David Prowse, do his voice. Just saying, George Lucas, thanks for taking the shot in the dark with James Earl Jones. Like, for real, man. That would have changed, like, the whole Star Wars narrative. Honestly, if they just had stuck with that one guy's voice.
David has a very physical, imposing presence. He does not have a vocal, imposing presence.
Seriously, go look it up. It's worth a watch just so you can be like, dodge that bullet.
Mufasa is the king of the Pride Lands and also the Sith Empire, so you're welcome. Anyway, thanks again for watching another roundtable review of a Star Wars film. Next month could potentially be even more full of praising because The Empire Strikes Back is considered to be the best Star Wars movie out there. We'll see if it's our favorite, but I don't think any of us could deny how great it is. In the meantime, look forward to some other reviews coming out later this week for the Lion King remake, in addition to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I don't know when that one will come out, but it will be here shortly. Otherwise, if you like this content, check out my Facebook, Letterboxd, and Instagram pages for more things you won't find here on this YouTube channel. And of course, thanks again to Justin and Jared for being here. I'm glad you're back, dude.
Yeah, I was gonna say Jared was back from his sabbatical, and we're glad that he's back. We missed him for the Rogue
I'm glad to
One.
be back too.
We missed him for the Rogue One review.
Which is one of my favorite Star Wars movies too, so I'm really sad that I missed that one.
Thanks again for watching, and y'all have a good one.
Bye bye.
Hasta luego.